The cloud does it. But then you still have to go through and log back into all the apps that you use.
Wow.
And you forget which one, like there's some of them that you rarely use, but you need it when you need it type thing. And then you can't remember your password, and then it wants two-factor authentication and all that crud. So this last week has been one of, that frustration. So
Challenge for someone over 40.
it is, and I'm over 40 now.
Just imagine what I went through trying to activate this since my Apple account was under my store email, which hasn't existed in 13 years.
I spent hours trying to transfer from an Android phone to an iPhone.
Oh, really?
Yesterday, and yeah, I gave my old iPhone to Laura, and she had an Android that she's been complaining about for years. So we first had to go to the AT&T store to get the same number, and he said it's easy to do.
Yeah.
But it was not. but eventually it happened. I couldn't ever do it again, but.
Well, and don't tell AT&T, but I want to switch service providers because the places I need signal, I don't get signal. So it's just like,
That's true.
I don't actually have any brand loyalty to anybody. But my wife has T-Mobile and she gets signal in her house just fine. So anyways, but the problem is, well, I didn't sign up for a contract because I just purchased the phone, so that was nice. So if I want to switch, I can switch. But I had to go back for AT&T again. And it was funny because there was 3 guys in the store. One was a trainee, one was the actual guy that runs the store, and then one was his boss. And you would think that with 3 people it would go faster. And in fact, it went 3 times slower. Because the trainee didn't know what he was doing. And he would ask his boss, and then his boss would ask his boss. So everything they were doing, every step was like the 3 Stooges of like, who knows how to do anything. And they didn't know which phones they had to stop, and which ones had deals. They'd say, I'm trying to get you the best deal. I don't want a deal. I just want a phone, and I want to leave.
They often, once you're in the store, they're going to try and sell you something.
You know what though? I think they sensed my attitude, and they didn't try to sell me anything. He did his, he did his obligatory ask about if I wanted a case or a screen protector or all that stuff. I'm like, no. Because I'll pay you $30 for the same thing and get off Amazon for 10. So they never buy things from the store. Plus, because there was a trainee, his boss, and his boss's boss, they were having a pretty upfront conversation about the perks that they get for upselling people. Like literally, they were talking numbers of like, well, if you can hit this number of peripherals, then you move into this category of income. Like, shouldn't you be telling me this stuff, you guys? So I thought about this, and I had a change of mind. I was thinking, we'll just like quickly walk through this entire 47-page document. And I realized, no, it's not going to happen. Plus, I think it would be pretty boring for me to just read article after article and say, oh, but this is important. Oh, but this is important. So I changed my mind, and what we're going to do is there are 5 sections to the
Can you make it larger?
Yeah, in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. There are 5 sections to this whole shebang, and they're misnumbered. Or they're out of order, so I'll just show you the sections. Because I was walking through section 1 and blah, blah, blah. I guess they changed it. They fixed it, okay. So, section 1 is foundational teaching. And essentially, this section is describing literally the foundations for where the committee is drawing its conclusions from. So like, what are the foundational ideas in Lutheran faith and belief that should inform our role as citizens in the government, if that makes sense. Section 2 gets into the specifics and talking about our responsibility to participate. So again, section 1 is like foundational documents, ideas, and beliefs. Section 2 is talking about what it means to participate in civic society. Section 3 is an analysis of our particular constitutional form of government and the implications of that. So I've talked about Dietrich Bonhoeffer a lot, but this is responsibility one of the church that Bonhoeffer articulated, which is the role of the church with regards to the state is to make sure the state is doing what it says it is going to do, right? So we're a constitutional government. We have a constitution that theoretically all of our government should be based upon. We spend lots of breath debating and discussing and talking about the implications of our Constitution and its amendments. And so we, as people of faith, should have a very vested interest, according to this document, in making sure we understand what the Constitution says, but then also holding our government to the Constitution. It's the same way that our church has a Constitution. We have a document, we have bylaws, we have things that describe the way that we're supposed to organize and act. We ran into it this last Sunday with, if Matt were here, he would talk about it at great length. According to our Constitution, every council vote we're supposed to have when we elect new council representatives, there's supposed to be a paper ballot. Well, we haven't been doing that since before I got here. We never have done that because we never get more than one candidate for a position. If we had two candidates, then we'd have to vote on it. We'd have to have a paper ballot. So Matt, being Matt, and I really appreciate him for this, said, we really need to have a paper ballot. So his answer to this was, since we didn't have anybody competing for any positions, is we had it printed in the semi-annual report. It was printed. It was on paper. We voted on the things that were printed on that paper. We voted on that slate of candidates, right? But we didn't hand out pieces of paper and have you write yea or nay on it, okay? But that's kind of...
Government then.
Yeah, we're a government. We are a self-governing entity, right?
And what the government does to
And this is a really interesting conversation as well, too, because I don't know if you realize the uniqueness of our form of governance in the ELCA relative to other mainline Protestant denominations. And it's not that we're special, but that each denomination is very unique in how it governs itself. So one of the things about being an ELCA congregation is we're very democratic, but we're also very congregational, okay? Especially relative to something like the United Methodist Church, which has a much more top-down management style. So what that means for us is that we as a congregation basically get to decide what we do. There is very few people, there's almost no one that is telling us you have to do things this way. We have a constitution. It's based off a model constitution that the ELCA provides as a guideline. And there are certain things that we have to adhere to if we want to be a congregation of the ELCA. But by and large, we hire our staff, we call our pastors, we manage our own budget. We don't have anybody telling us what to do, right? So we're very congregational. United Methodist congregations manage their own resources, but they get told who their pastor's going to be. And it's on a very short window. They get a pastor for 3 to 5 years. Anything beyond 5 years is pretty abnormal. And being a pastor in the United Methodist Church means that you're going to get told where you're going every 3 to 5 years, right?
We had a neighbor years ago, and he was a pastor of the community church, and they moved their people every 6 years.
Yes.
And so after 6 years, he was told he would go someplace in Washington where they needed a pastor who knew how to physically build up a building and stuff, because that was one of his talents.
Yeah. And the thing is there are benefits and problems with both methods, right? You know, one of the benefits of our method is that it's more of a hiring process, right? You get to interview candidates, so theoretically the pastor that you call is going to be one that the congregation sees a good fit with. You're not being told who you're getting, right? We also get longer tenures, so you know, one of the things that I've often heard is because we stay at congregations longer, we get a chance to do more, right? There's more continuity of leadership, so theoretically, if the pastor knows what they're doing, they get a chance to affect more change or do good things in the congregation. The downside, though, is it can lead to stagnation, right? You get comfortable with each other. You're not bringing in new things. The other thing is you can get a confusion of the identity of the congregation with the identity of the pastor. One of the things about UMC congregations, and I've seen this because Oak Grove UMC is one that I've worked with quite frequently. is that they have a very strong congregational identity, separate from the identity of the pastor. Which can be good and bad for the pastor, because if the pastor doesn't get along with the congregation, it can be a long 3 to 5 years. And the congregation oftentimes develops a pretty firm understanding of their own identity over and against the identity of the pastor. Right? So it was a bit of a tangent, but this is one of the things that this document talks about, which is that we also fulfill this role as citizens of the United States. Right? We are collectively governed in that we are a democratic nation, and so we are participating in that. But the role of the church, especially, is to make sure that we're doing what we say we do, right? Which is that we are abiding by our Constitution, abiding by our laws, and all of the documents that govern us. And you can understand perhaps a little bit why this might be front and center in this document right now, especially with questions around whether or not the current federal administration is abiding by the Constitution at all, or whether they're just kind of doing their own thing. And again, this is not meant to be a critique of the current federal administration. This document was started long before that, okay? But, it's one of those, this is kind of like what I talked about in January. If I preach the gospel and it sounds like a critique of something political, it's not, I didn't necessarily intend that to be, but I'm not going to change what I say because of it, Similarly, if advocating for constitutional responsibility is a critique of the federal administration, it's not our fault, right? Okay? It's not our fault. Maybe we're not the ones that are wrong, to put it that way. Sorry, I just wanted to check my sound levels because I'm noticing the audio is funky on here. That's okay. We're going to go. That's fine. Okay. That's section 3. Oh gosh. Scrolling a 40-page document with pain in the tooth. Oh, I went back too far. Good Lord. Okay. There we go. Okay, section 4 is free speech. So religion and the First Amendment. And this is something that's also very relevant. I think I brought it up a couple of weeks ago, which is the Supreme Court has essentially issued, or the IRS has essentially changed their policy on religion and politics insofar as that the IRS has stated it's okay for pastors to tell their congregation who to vote for. That does not endanger their nonprofit tax status. Which is interesting because it makes churches unique in that nonprofits aren't supposed to advocate,
Right.
but we are allowed to. It's a really weird thing. And so section 4 gets into basically everything surrounding that, which is talking about what's permissible, but also what's responsible from the standpoint of us being Lutherans. How do we relate to the First Amendment? What is healthy within congregations? Again, it's not just about what's permissible according to the law, but it's what is healthy as communities of engaged citizens, if that makes sense. And then section 5, it's clear to do this, is all about how we, the church, relate to our government. So in other words, how we nurture positive relationships with elected officials and authorities, what our roles and responsibilities are toward those elected authorities, all that kind of stuff. And then section 6 is the closing section, and it's basically kind of a summary of what it means to be a citizen in our modern era. So different things that we're dealing with right now. Any questions so far? So what I want to do then is, instead of walking through it, I want to basically pick things that you guys want to talk about or you might be curious about. And if it takes us into this document, great. If not, that's great as well too. But just something that you want to talk about with regards to church and state and civic responsibility and all that. Wayne.
So in theory, you could get both sides of the position.
And not just in theory, preferably you would get both sides of the position. In fact, you will see this in pretty much every social statement the ELCA has ever put out, is that when the way that they articulate it is they say, here is a summary of how our congregations look at this issue. And the one that, again, that is foremost in my mind is the statement of human sexuality, because I was heavily immersed in that while I was in seminary. And if you read that document, that document goes through and it says, here's how some of our congregations feel about this issue, and here's how others feel about this issue, and here's the contrast between those two beliefs, and how do we find either a middle ground, or what Lutherans like to do especially is how do we hold those two ideas in tension? In other words, allowing them both to be valid opinions, but we dwell with that.
When I was working, I had to pay money into the NEA because I worked for school.
National Education Association, for those of you not.
And every year when voting came up, they stood behind one candidate or another.
Yeah.
And sometimes I agreed with it and sometimes I didn't, but then that's just how it was. They made the decision.
Yeah, and my mother, being a teacher at Michigan, was a member of the NEA and the MEA, the Michigan Education Association. And sometimes the candidate of choice for the MEA didn't always line up with the candidate of choice for the NEA. It was interesting. That didn't happen often. Yeah, I mean, and
That's the well, you think maybe it's the majority, but in that situation, I'm not sure it is. It may have been the people who have the higher offices for the state of Oregon or something who decide.
if I remember correctly, like the NEA has essentially a committee for candidate approval or whatever. Because all they're doing is they're reading through what the candidates say that they're for and deciding who's the best choice for your role as a teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, I would put this out here too. This is a really important thing. Which, are you guys familiar with Luther's concept of vocation? Vocation. Vocation is this idea that if this circle represents us, an individual, right? We have different vocations. So we have different pieces that make us up. And you can even say identities, right? So one of those pieces.
Us meaning group or individual?
Individual. Well, it applies both ways. We are, some of us are parent, we're all child, maybe engineer is a vocation, etc. You get the idea. One of those vocations is citizen. And so, one of our responsibilities I spelled parent right. I'm second guessing myself. One of our responsibilities as Christians is, all of these things. Okay? But here's the important part. This big circle that is us, we claim also is a bigger, one of the overarching vocations is child of God, right? Our faith identity should not be a subset. Our faith identity should basically summarize all of us. Does that make sense? It should be part of our whole identity. It shouldn't be a sub-vocation, okay? And what this means is that all of these different vocations then should be, according to Luther, filtered through that overall faith identity, if that makes sense. So when we talk about our role as citizen, we are a citizen just like a person who is a Muslim or a Jew or whatever, okay? Being a Christian should not make us more of a citizen than anybody else as well, too. And this is one of the issues that we're dealing with right now with concepts like white nationalism or Christian nationalism, is this idea that, well, we're a Christian nation, and Luther especially would argue there's no such thing. One of his other ideas was the idea of two kingdoms, right? There's the kingdom of earth and the kingdom of heaven. They are two very distinct things, and they shouldn't mix, right? Because you don't want, as much as we would like the kingdom on earth to resemble the kingdom of heaven, what generally happens is the kingdom of heaven ends up more resembling our kingdom on earth. In other words, we make God more like us rather than make us more like God. And so as citizens, as Christian citizens, our citizenship should be understood through the lens of our faith, but it doesn't make us unique. It doesn't make us different or better with regards to everybody else. I don't know why I got on that. It was something about something somebody asked. Anyways, I don't know where it's going. NEA. Anyway, this is a perfect. NEA is a perfect example, or other agencies like that. Like how many of you were part of a union or are part of a union? Cynthia, Tracy, yeah. My family grew up DFL, Democratic Farm Labor. My dad was a huge union dude because he worked construction when he got out of Vietnam. He stood on picket lines and had interesting interaction, and he was very opinionated. He has continued to articulate this. He fought scabs, he fought picket breakers, the whole 9 yards. So he has some very strong opinions about unions and their role in our world and role in guaranteeing employment. I fully support that. So that has influenced my views. But when you're talking about participating in something like the NEA or participating in a union, right?
They didn't have a choice.
Yeah, as a teacher, you didn't have a choice. Yeah, you were automatically opted into that, for better or worse, right? But when they're advocating, you should vote for so-and-so, they're saying, in your role as a teacher, this would be in your best interest. I think that's kind of like that dividing line of, they're saying, here would be the best choice according to their policies for teachers. But at the end of the day, you can still vote for whoever you want, whether you think that's the best case or not. Similarly, that's theoretically how unions work. And again, when we talk about all of these vocations that make us up, this is ultimately, how we do vote, how we do choose who we're going to support is all of these little pieces that inform what's in our best interest or what's in the best interest of our children or our job or our environment. All those kind of factor into play. But again, Luther would argue they all flow through the lens of your faith. All right? That is that overarching identity. One of the struggles is that filtering through the lens of your faith doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're doing it right. And what I mean by this is, and again, you'll hear this articulated, is especially in our modern world, is that you'll hear the media quite talk about the Christian lobby.
Well, sometimes the Christian rule for something bumps up against the humanity rule for something.
Well, and that's a question, isn't it? That's a question, isn't it? Is should those things be at odds, right?
Well, we have a war and gossip because of religious conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and that's one aspect of it, the religious conflict. There are more issues beyond just Muslim and Jew, right? Because Palestine is also made up of a bunch of Christians as well too, which everybody conveniently forgets when we get into religious conversations.
And even Christians can read the Bible differently.
Absolutely, and that's where I'm heading towards as well too. Is we ultimately are encouraged to filter things through the lens of our faith, but our understanding of our faith is unique to each and every one of us, right? And so at the end of the day, and again, Luther would advocate, is that you surrender that identity to God, right? So ultimately, when we talk about hierarchy is not a great word for it, but you're saying, I understand it this way, but ultimately, I'm in the kingdom of earth. I'm a sinful, again, that word can be complicated, but I'm a flawed human being who doesn't necessarily always perfectly see and understand the image of God, if that makes sense. It's complicated. Susan.
There's an article in this morning's paper about a woman who wants to be a foster parent, but they require a kind of a statement of tolerance, acceptance of LGBTQ.
Yeah.
And she says with her Christian beliefs, she cannot follow that, and a court has decided that she can still foster youth, just not any LGBTQ. In an article like that, I want to see a sentence that said, despite the fact that there are 10 different varieties of intersex and other kinds of genetic and biochemical variances, this is what her particular church believes. It just legitimizes it or normalizes it, or people then think all Christians believe this way.
Yeah.
Darn it.
I know. I deal with this every day. I was at
And I have people, when they hear that I belong to the ELCA,
evangelical.
and then say, oh, you're one of those radical evangelicals?
Yeah.
And I'm going, no, there's a difference.
Yeah. Well, and you should know that that's actually going to be, that has been memorialized to the churchwide assembly that's occurring right about now, actually, which is considering a name change for the ELCA in light of, I doubt it'll pass. I think that ship has sailed a long time ago. I don't know that we're going to change our name, especially since our brain, it costs so much to rebrand everything. But yeah, and it's the same issue as why did they get to claim that identity? Why did they get to own Christian?
Change their name.
Yeah, and that's a complex issue. That's also one of the consequences of profit-funded media, right? Profit-funded reporting as opposed to public service journalism. Sorry, I'm not intentionally trying to get into any current topics, but you all have witnessed the change in journalism over the course of your lifetime. I have, right? I grew up with Dan Rather and all of these figures that I saw and trusted because they were trustworthy. They were people of integrity. Barbara Walters and Connie Chung. I remember, Walter Cronkite.
Huntley and Brinkley.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you one journalist, other than the talking heads on the different news stations, and everybody knows that they're just opinion mouthpieces. Everybody, even the people that really suck that stuff up, they know what it is, and we do it gladly. Give me the drip feed of my opinion. Just tell me that I'm right. That's what news is about, anyways. So yeah, so you talk about why does a news article get to refer to this woman as Christian, which influences her opinions on these issues, and doesn't identify that woman's particular beliefs might even be a minority in the grand schema of Christianity. The other one, well, anyways, I don't want to get into that stuff, but yeah. It's tough. It's the world that we live in. And again, and this kind of, for me, reiterates why these types of conversations, these types of documents are important, because in a way, it is our voice, it is our collective voice, all 3 million of us in the U.S., saying, no, that's not, we are not going to allow our voice to be co-opted into this overarching umbrella of quote-unquote Christian that is so prevalent in the U.S., right? We're not going to allow, in any way, shape, or form, right? Anything else? I know there were a couple of hands.
I have a question that goes back about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And that was about the different pastors who can put in their thoughts and their congregational desires and all that. My question is, does each Senate put out a regular survey, or is it up to pastors to make a determination? I need to tell the Senate this is what's going on.
With regards to what?
Anything, questions about. You said that the ELCA regularly gets input from pastors, but which way does it go? Do the pastors get asked for their input, or do they?
D, all of the above.
Oh, okay.
Well, but no, this is fascinating stuff, because this is why
what's your chain of command?
This is why our church is governed the way it is again, there are many different mechanisms, but again, the overarching understanding of our form of governance is the idea that each member of each congregation and each synod in the ELCA has equal voice in our governance, right? So the way that we're organized is designed, again, for better or worse, to facilitate that, right? So the way that it works is I'm a pastor in the ELCA. I every year go to Synod Assembly. I go to Bishop's Convocation. I participate in cluster gatherings. All of these gatherings are designed for me to both speak and represent my congregation, but also to hear from other pastors and other congregations. And similarly, and this is something that lamentably has declined somewhat in the decades, how many of you were part of, what did it used to be called?
LCA?
Yeah, not LCA. What was the women's group used to be called? WELCA. Yeah, WELCA. Good Lord. My grandmother was the president of WELCA for our part of Michigan for a long time. And in reality, in the history of this congregation, and many congregations, there used to be much more lay organization and involvement. We used to have, and kind of still do, a group in Oregon called OLEO, which was Oregon Youth. No, Oregon, yeah. The Y came after the L. Anyways, it was basically
Lutheran Youth or something like that.
Oregon Lutheran Youth Association.
Yeah, something
Yes.
like
Or organization. Ended with an O. That has declined because they've struggled to get kids to participate in it. And this isn't, sorry, this sounds a little bit doomer, but one of the realities is, yes, the way that theoretically information is exchanged and voices are represented is through these different gatherings. We've lost some of that with regards to our laity. There aren't as many organizations anymore, whereby you end up spending time with other people from other congregations. It still happens. Synod Assembly is one of those gatherings where representatives from this congregation meet and network with representatives from other congregations. We get to hear the concerns of other congregations. That's what resolutions and memorials are. We also get to hear the concerns from the broader denomination because we get a report from the church, from Churchwide every year at our Synod Assembly. So again, it's the way that this structure is designed to do that, whether or not it does it well or not, if that makes sense. Pat?
Well, I'm sorry I didn't cut it out of the paper this morning, but in the opinion piece where people write in letters, there was a quote from a German Lutheran pastor who said, basically, some big organization, he didn't speak up against it, and then there was another one, and he didn't speak up against it, and then there were the Jews, and he didn't speak up for the Jews, and then he needed somebody to speak up for him, and there was
Nobody left. Yeah, I've heard that comment expressed in various ways. And it's true. It is true. It is true. We human beings are very much a sinking ship. The sinking ship metaphor where we're not worried that the ship is sinking until the water gets to our level, until it comes for us. If you're standing on the tip of the Titanic as it's going down, you might not notice the problem, so to speak. I'm going to read a section, and then, we've got maybe 15 minutes left, and then talk about it. This is basically a summary of section 1. So again, 6 sections. This is a summary of kind of like the foundational grounding for all the ideas that it's sharing. I'm going to just read a few sentences. I can zoom in too, I think. How can I do that?
And this presentation is on the ELC website?
Yes.
Too big.
There, is that legible?
Much better.
Okay, I'm starting at this social statement. This social statement is undergirded by that biblical term, and the biblical term is hesed, love and kindness. But in the context of civic life, it employs other terms such as the well-being of all or the common good, because they are earthly measures toward God's intention. Did you parse that sentence? This is one of my issues with social statements, is that a lot of the times the people that write them are impressed with their own writing.
How true.
There's a much easier way to say this sentence.
Right.
So what they're saying is essentially that we understand that God encouraged us, or compels us to care for the common good. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, or the well-being. The ELCA witnesses to the Holy Trinity and the unity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, whose power is expressed in offering abundant life now and eternally. We teach that God is all-powerful in that only God is the source of all power. I want to repeat that one. We teach that God is all-powerful in that only God is the source of all power, and you'll notice that all is in italics. God's power alone brings forth and sustains the universe, redeems the sinner, and promises creation's ultimate fulfillment. I want to talk about that concept specifically. This concept that it's only God who is the source of all power. What do you hear when you read that?
I heard Donald Trump say God saved his life, and that's why he's our president.
Ah!
I mean, that's sort of how people see
that, you think?
people in power. Then it's sort of like, well, it's self-understood. The reason they're powerful is because God chose them to have power, and so that's that. I don't believe that, but that's what. I think that's how people justify
How are we defining power?
all sorts of bad things.
It
Yes.
says to me that eventually it'll all be the way God wants it,
Sure.
no matter what we may be going through.
I'm going to scroll down. We'll come back. I'm going to talk about this, and then we'll talk about what the document says about it. So yeah, ultimately the question is, what is power? And whether power is synonymous with the person who wields it, whether it's inherent to the person who wields it. Because this is the history of human leadership, is that for a large part of our history, we, and by we, I mean we Christians, supported the idea that there are specific people who God specially chose to be our leaders, and that because of that special selection, everybody else had to just do whatever they told us. That's feudalism.
Well, Louis
Divine
the
right
14th,
of-
Louis the 16th, I mean.
Yeah, that's the divine right of kings.
Divine right of kings.
That it is to a T.
It's
Okay?
not new now.
It's not. This is not new. This has been forever. And to be fair, it's not just special people. It's specific special people. So men, not women. And then skin color has historically had a lot to do with, and still does. Who are the special people that God picks to be in power? Every human prejudice is reflected in who can be our leaders, right? We're still dealing with that. You hear a lot of people say there's no way that we're ever going to get a woman president or another black president or a gay president because we, the United States of America, will never support that. Still a question now. Even though our Constitution articulates the idea that there should be, right? If we're a representative form of government, that eventually, we should be represented by people of all genders and nationalities and sexuality. But, there's reality and there's the idea. Let me read the next sentences to contribute to it. In God's activity toward the well-being of all, we encounter a use of power that is unlike many human practices of power. God is sovereign, but God's sovereignty, or God's separateness, gives power to creatures rather than deprives them of it. Okay, that's an important sentence. God's sovereignty gives power to creatures rather than deprives them of it. In contrast to the usual political, zero-sum understanding of power, God gives freely, sharing abundantly without loss. God's sovereign power produces human power. It does not diminish it. Wherever humans are given their power, and again, I would underline given their power in order to serve God, creation, and their fellow humans. And this is ultimately the issue at hand, is whether you understand that power is separable from those who wield it, right? Whether or not, how we understand power to be manifest. So again, the way that it has played out in human history, we talk about the divine right of kings, is this idea that there are special people who God picked to be the people in power, be the wealthy ones. We see this idea manifest in a lot of different ways. We talk about the concept of manifest destiny. God gave us Europeans, though we're not European anymore, the privilege of inheriting this empty land. Empty land and all that comes along with it, right? We justify. Go ahead, Jim.
The word power disturbs me. I mean, there's so many other words that could have been selected. All justice, all love, all caring. And not to say there's a big gap between Old Testament and New Testament, but would power be more appropriate in the Old Testament than I would read in the New Testament?
This is the same issue as with a lot of words, which is what they mean with how they've been used.
Yeah.
So the word Christian, right? Christian has been turned into a label that is used as a justification in and of itself. So instead of Christian applying to somebody who behaves in a way that resembles God, whatever Christians do is Christ-like. Right? It's the reverse, right? I claim the label of Christian, and then whatever I do is whatever God wants because I'm a Christian.
It's become a political label.
And it's become a political label. It's become so many things. Power is the means to do something, the means to affect something, right? Power is electricity, right? Power is work. I can push this table. Power from a political table, whatever this is. Power in a political sense or a governing sense is the means to affect something with regards to their governance. What this document is articulating, which, again, this is what we believe theoretically, is the idea that, in all power being given by God, is that ultimately power is not inherent in specific people. Power is a gift that is given to people, that is entrusted to people. It is a responsibility. And it always needs to be a responsibility in such a way that it's for the well-being of all human beings, well-being of all people. And what they're articulating there as well, too, is that it's not meant to be an either-or. In other words, we're not meant to invest all power in one person, right? Because that's not how God works. God doesn't just sit up here and pull strings and make us dance, right? We, as human beings, for better or worse, are given free will and autonomy. I mean, this is Genesis 3. This is the consequences of being human beings. Is we don't always do the right thing.
You have more power than I do, so you also have maybe more responsibility.
I have different power, and in some ways I have more power. And this is, for me, this is a fun conversation because as pastor, right, in some ways I do have more power with regards to the governance of this congregation, but I should be very careful not to understand it that way because from a Lutheran perspective, I am not the Lord of this congregation. I am the servant of this congregation, right? I am a servant leader, okay? And sometimes, even for me, I don't like necessarily being the one in the position of power, that line gets blurred. And especially when I disagree. When I think that I know the right thing, and you all just need to fall in line, right? But you can understand how that happens. I mean, has anybody ever been in a position of leadership, and you've had to drag people along kicking and screaming because you know the right way, and they just need to shape up? Yeah, I mean... But again, what makes that healthy and functioning is that I understand that power is a gift given to me, right? That in my letter of call, right, you have called me to be servant of this congregation, and you have called me to serve this congregation in two very specific roles, which is I'm a minister of word, teaching and preaching, and sacrament, administering baptism and communion. There's a whole lot of other job responsibilities that come along with that. But at the end of the day, I should probably still see those things through that lens, right? And I do my best. And each pastor is different. Each pastor, manages or doesn't manage, differently. And this is also how we should understand our political appointees, our elected officials, is that the power that they are given is not inherent to them, even though they just won a popularity campaign. That's all it is anymore. They want a long popularity campaign, but the power that they hold is given to them by us. It's given to them by us, which is given to us by God. Okay? And so ultimately, from the president to a mayor, as Christians, we're articulating that the power that they hold, the responsibility that they hold with regards to whichever, whether it's the United States or whether it's the city of Milwaukee, we as Christians are arguing is a gift from God. That they are holding in their hands a very powerful gift and responsibility, and the consequences of mismanaging that are scaling according to the amount of power that they hold as well too, right? We see this in everyday life, which is that people in positions of responsibility ultimately should experience scaling consequences.
I think the word we miss very often is servant.
Yes.
Servant, I agree, absolutely.
That's what I was gonna say. Is
Well, and it's in our language.
Yeah.
Public servants.
Humans are given their power
Yeah.
in order to serve creation.
Yes.
And-
Yes.
And what some people
Oh,
in
that's so
power, what some people in power that have been elected forget that we're their boss.
Well,
They're not our boss.
and let's talk about that word. And again, if you just walked in, this is the first of 6 sections in this document, and I'm just trying to summarize each of these sections. So I'm lifting out the sentences that essentially describe what that section is about. We're talking about them, and over the next couple of weeks, we're going to basically look at each section, but in a kind of holistic way. We're not going to go through line by line, if that makes sense. But you said a word there, which is very important, which is in that document, which is this. We tend to think of governance as being human-centric. What does it mean for Christians to articulate that God has given power and responsibility to our leaders for the sake of creation?
It's not just human beings,
It's the very soil under our feet.
Yeah.
That to be whatever. The mayor of Milwaukee, president of the United States of America, is to care for and serve all the people of the United States of America, but also the very ground on which we stand. That care for creation, from a Christian sense, is part of the responsibility of power.
The word dominion appears
Yeah.
somewhere, and people
Genesis 2.
tend to interpret that to mean, let's lay waste to the land, or, but I believe in my research of this word, there's a sense of care and, let's just say caring for.
Yeah, and I can't remember offhand the Hebrew word that gets translated as dominion. But this has been a debate, is whether it should be translated to responsibility or a different word. And pretty much every biblical scholar that we talk to is saying, no, this is probably the best choice. Here's the disconnect, is the way that this word has evolved through time, specifically because of how our forms of governance have evolved, right? In a world where theoretically we're part of a democratic republic where we each have voice, the idea of anybody having dominion over somebody else is a negative, right? That's what kings do. The form of governance that existed when Genesis 2 was being described was one of dominion, right? In a lot of ways. There were people in power who had a domain, right? Who had a domain that they were responsible for, okay? And a lot of power was invested in those folks. And if you look at the history of Israel, their most, according to Jewish understanding, their most prosperous time was during the reign of King David, who had Israel as his dominion. Of course, the issue is that when you invest that power into one person, a lot depends on the quality of that person, okay? Which is why governance has evolved over, the intervening 3,000 years, and why we in the United States of America have been successful, because we have put power in different places, theoretically. Why we have 3 branches of government and and why we have layers of federal, state, and local government. And again, contrast to a place like France, which is a much more, well, flat leadership like that. But it's a different thing. But here's the kind of the question at hand is, if God gives us dominion over creation and its creatures, the assumption is that we care for and are responsible toward creation and its creatures. And it's also descriptive as well as prescriptive. I mean, this is getting into anthropology to a certain extent, but human beings are strange creatures. We are unique as far as we understand, as far as we are aware, in our intelligence, our consciousness, our ability to use tools and make better tools and do all of these things. And it's part of how we understand ourselves. I mean, for a long time, we have, for better or worse, defined humanity as not being animal, right? There are the humans and then there are beasts, and we have drawn firm lines between those two. And unfortunately, a lot of racism was based off of that, defining that line, dehumanizing people to make them less human and more animal, right? We talk about primitives and savages and people that the racist rhetoric. Okay. Of course, in the modern and in a lot of the way that our thinking is changing, that line is getting more blurred in that we're realizing that our intelligence, our consciousness is more beholden to animal instinct than we like to admit. And you will experience this every day if you work past your lunch break and you start to get hangry, right? That's your body telling you, hey buddy, you need to put fuel back in this,
Three things. Two sentences that Bud said a number of times.
Uh-huh.
The Hebrews were not a scientific people.
Sure.
And words don't have meanings, they carry meanings. And I think that's what we're talking about here today.
Yeah.
And then the third is a commentary on, it seems to me that the skill set for running for office is totally different from the skill set for actually being governing and administrating.
Yeah.
And we vote for the personality in the process.
We have a lot of problems right now. And I'm not saying that to diminish it. I'm saying to acknowledge that. That is one of them, which, what Susan articulated is that the skill set needed to campaign and get elected is different than the skill set needed to govern. It's 100% true. It's 100% true. I have experienced this. One of my constant gripes is that the skill set needed to get through the candidacy process for the ELCA is different than the skill set needed to be a pastor in the ELCA. We have spent a lot of time and effort trying to reconcile those two things, but for a long time the skill set needed to be a pastor in the ELCA, the LCA, the ALC, was to be a white male. A young white male with a wife and a couple of kids, because then that made them safe. And as our leadership has changed, we've had to reconcile that isn't necessarily a guarantee of anything. I lament that a lot of things that I needed to know in being a pastor were not taught to me. That most of the things that I needed to know in regards to the practical management of the congregation were never. I learned to theologize really well. It helps me in this stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's an issue. I went on a parallel tangent there. Also, the role of money in our elections process is absolutely corrupt and just has become a monster. In terms of who can get into office, it's only people that have money to begin with, which was the point, right? Was the point of our Constitution and this form of governance. Again, the original people that wrote that were white landowning males, and so they were trying to protect their privilege a little bit as well too. But one of the common dreams that Americans have always held is the idea that anybody can be in that office, and the reality is no. That's no, not anybody can be in that office. You need to be wealthy or have wealth, and you probably still need to be a white male, unfortunately. We have a lot of problems that are facing our country, in the world in general, right? I mean, let's be fair to ourselves as well too. Despite all the stuff that's going on right now, we still got a lot of good. And to kind of tie it back in, because we do need to wrap up here. Again, this is the purpose of this document, is to kind of, with fresh eyes, take a look at our identity as Lutherans and what we believe our government should look like. That's what a lot of this is, what we believe what it should look like. And all the stuff that we talked about today is feeding right into God. It begins with, we're in section 1 out of 6, it begins with the idea that power is a gift from God. It's not inherent to the person. It's something that is entrusted to them. And that power is to be used for all people and all creation. Whether you are the mayor of Milwaukee or the president of the United States of America or the prime minister of Great Britain, right? That you should have a bigger lens than just the people that voted for you, or even just your constituents, right? That being a Christian means that ultimately we're always being asked to widen our gaze, right? To understand that, yeah, my job as the mayor of Milwaukee is to represent and care for the citizens of Milwaukee, but it should never come at the cost of the citizens of Oak Grove, right? If that makes sense. That's what being a Christian means. Doesn't necessarily mean that makes the best mayor of Milwaukee, at least from the perspective of people who vote for them, because the citizens of Milwaukee, want them to represent them and their interests, and those people are paying way less property. I'm making up stuff here, right? I don't actually know the property taxes, but they're paying way less property taxes, and they should be paying their share because we're providing them with all these services. I don't know, I'm making stuff up here. But you can understand how that conflicts. But we're not necessarily talking about what's best for Milwaukee or what's best for the United States. We're talking about, as Christians, as Lutherans, how God calls us to understand our government and our role as citizens. And ultimately, I know it's time to take this up. This is why we find ourselves in the place that we're in. Is that 60 years ago, well, no, let's say 80 years ago, well, longer than that. Do my math, Jesse. 100 years ago, the U.S. was a lot different because we existed in this corner of the world, a lot of the corner of the world. We're a big geographical nation. But by and large, we only had to worry about our own problems. World War I and World War II and the consecutive conflicts have shown us that is not the case. That as technology improves, as communication improves, as travel improves, as we develop a world economy, that in fact, the United States is in a lot of ways a citizen of nations, right? That we belong in a much bigger picture. And one of the forces right now is people wanting to say no. We don't want to do that. We want to care for our concerns. Who cares how that affects anybody else? And I'm kind of shaping that to be selfish. And that's my bias, I apologize. But that is really one of the big conflicts right now, is who we care for as the United States of America. What I hear this document saying, and what I personally believe, is that it doesn't matter whether I'm a citizen of the U.S., I still need to care for our neighbors. I need to care for what's happening in Taiwan or Thailand or Mongolia or Russia or Ukraine or Palestine or Israel, because that's what God tells me to care for. And so when I vote, yes, I'm voting for my own interests, but my lens always needs to be bigger than that. I always need to be thinking about how what we do impacts those around us in the same way that we think about, right, how our individual behavior affects those around us. That's hard. It's hard, especially when you've got some 400 million odd people spread across this very vast area with different cultures and people that just want to, I don't know, just want to grow up, get married, have some kids, hunt and fish, and do whatever. Hey, God bless. More power to you. But we can't ignore the fact that we actually live in a much smaller world than these days. Anyways, I gotta go do church stuff. I can talk about this the whole day.